All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to peek under the hood of India's government, the engine room of the world's biggest democracy. We're talking about its parliamentary system. It's a setup that impacts over 1 billion lives. And what's really interesting is how it all boils down to one key difference from other big democracies out there. So, have you ever wondered why India has a prime minister, but when you look at the USA, they have a president? It seems like a simple question, right? But the answer? Well, it's not just about the different titles. It actually opens up two totally different philosophies on how you even build a government. And these are the two big models we're talking about, the parliamentary system and the presidential system. But here's the thing. The real difference isn't the leader's job title. Nope, it's all about where their power comes from. And to really get that, we've got to dig a little deeper. Okay, so here's our game plan. We'll start with the two systems, then see how India's government actually gets put together. We'll talk about what makes it a responsible government, look at the presidential alternative, and wrap up with why India chose the path it did. Let's jump in. All right, first things first. If you really want to get a handle on how any government works, forget about the leaders for a second. The real key is to start with the three basic branches of power. And, more importantly, how they relate to each other. So pretty much every democracy has these three core jobs, right? You've got the legislature, which, well, they make the laws. Then you have the executive, who puts those laws into action. And finally, the judiciary, which is all about delivering justice. Now, here's the kicker. The entire difference between a parliamentary and a presidential system comes down to the relationship between just the first two, the ones who make the laws and the ones who enforce them. Okay, so let's take that framework and apply it directly to India. How does this all actually, build a government? Let's trace the path, starting from a single person casting a vote all the way up to the prime minister's office. Right. So in India, that first branch we talked about, the legislature, the folks who make the laws, is called the parliament. And everything, I mean everything, begins right here. And this is how it all unfolds, kind of like a chain reaction. First, you and I, the people, we vote for our local representatives, our MPs, who go to the Lok Sabha, which is a part of parliament. Then, whichever political party, or a group of parties working together, wins more than half the seats, they get to form the government. And the leader of that winning party? That person is appointed prime minister. And their final step is to choose a team, the Council of Ministers, from their own ranks in parliament. So this team, the prime minister and their handpicked ministers, that's the executive. They're the ones in charge of actually running the country and implementing the laws. But did you catch the crucial detail? They all came from inside the legislature. They were lawmakers first. And that connection, that's the whole ballgame. And this right here, this brings us to the absolute core principle of the whole system. It's this idea of a responsible government. And trust me, that's not just some fancy political term. The entire structure is designing around this one concept. Think of it like this. The executive, so the prime minister and their ministers, they're basically wearing two hats all the time. With one hat on, their job is to run the country, to implement laws. But with their other hat, they are still just elected MPs who have to go back and answer to all their colleagues in parliament, and you can't separate those two jobs. Ever. And that is exactly why it's called a responsible system. The government, the executive, can't just go off and do whatever it feels like. Why? Because it was born from the legislature and it is accountable to the legislature for everything. It's a built-in feedback loop, and that's the whole point of the design. But this whole responsibility thing isn't just a pinky promise, It's not just a friendly agreement. It comes with a very powerful tool, a mechanism that has some serious teeth. It's the ultimate check on the government's power. And here it is. This is the key. The executive stays in power only as long as it has the confidence of the legislature. So if Parliament feels the government is just not doing its job properly, it can introduce something called a no-confidence motion. And if that motion passes, the government is out, gone. It's an incredibly effective tool. Really the ultimate check, to make sure the government can't just ignore the people's elected representatives. Okay, so that's the parliamentary model in a nutshell. Now, to really drive home how unique it is, let's put it side by side with the alternative, the presidential system. like the one they have in the United States.
In a presidential system, the one word you gotta remember is separation. The executive branch is totally independent from the legislature. The people elect the president directly in a separate election, and the president is not a sitting member of Congress. They're two different teams, basically.
So, when you put them next to each other, the difference is stark, isn't it? In India, the executive and legislature are fused. The executive comes out of the legislature. But in the US, they're separate and co-equal. They have ways to check and balance each other's power, for sure, but the legislature can't just fire the president with a no-confidence vote.
Which leads us to the final piece of our puzzle, and it's a big one. When India's founders were writing the Constitution, they had these two very different models to choose from. So why did they deliberately pick the parliamentary system?
Well, the answer, like so many things, is in the history. You see, for decades leading up to independence, Indians had already been getting familiar with how parliamentary-style government worked, thanks to the British system. So it made sense. Instead of starting from scratch with a system they didn't know, the Constituent Assembly chose to work with the one they were already familiar with. They basically took that model and made some really important changes to make it fit India's unique situation.
And a huge reason behind that choice was this belief in the power of debate and discussion. I mean, the parliamentary system is literally designed for it. Think about it. The government has to show up to work in Parliament every day, right alongside the opposition. This means they can be questioned, challenged, and held accountable in real time on issues that the public really cares about.
And a healthy debate needs a strong opposition. The opposition's job isn't just to oppose for the sake of it. Their role is to be a quality check, to poke holes in policy, to point out shortcomings, and to put forward well-researched arguments. The whole idea is that this back and forth, this constructive conflict, actually helps create better, stronger laws in the end.
So there you have it. That's the blueprint for India's government. It's a system that's built from the ground up on this principle of accountability, where the government has to answer to the people's representatives, day in and day out. It was all founded on this powerful idea that rigorous debate leads to better government for everyone. Which, of course, leaves us with one last question to think about. Is that original spirit, that deep commitment to discussion and deliberation, still alive and well in India's parliament today? Thanks for joining us.